Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And here we go again. It's yet another edition. It's Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. Today we're talking about books and writing and a disaster in Nova Scotia. Ken Cuthbertson is with us. We're going to talk about Blood on the Coal. So Ken, we've talked to you before about the 1945 book, so welcome back.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. It's always great to talk with you.
And Ken is in Kingston, Ontario. He just mentioned he was for a few years working in Regina at the Regina Leader Post. Let's go back a bit to newspapers. I guess newspapers then and newspapers now are completely different.
Yeah, there were newspapers back then.
Right.
There aren't newspapers now. I never cease to be amazed and saddened by the course of what's happened with newspapers in this country and elsewhere. I think, when we don't have local newspapers, particularly in the smaller centers, it's not so bad in those big cities where they've got access to other media. But in a smaller center, when you lose the local newspaper, and even weekly newspapers, community newspapers, you lose a sense of identity and I think a sense of togetherness. And that's, at the root of a lot of the problems I think we have now when people don't talk to one another, don't care about others as much as they once used to. We still worry about our neighbors, but that sense of a general community, and particularly in a smaller town, is lost, and I think that's a real shame, unfortunately.
It is.
That's just the way the world goes on.
That's the way it goes. It's my hobby horse, but I guess things always change because 100 years ago, if you were a telegraph operator, that was a great job, but.
Yeah, that's right. Where are all the telegraph operators today?
No,
collecting their pensions, we hope, but I think most of them are gone, along with the buggy whip manufacturers.
Yeah, Ken Cuthbertson is with us. We're talking about Blood on the Coal, the true story of the Great Spring Hill mine disaster, with a foreword, by the way, by Anne Murray. So, briefly, did you get to meet Anne in person, or was this like over the internet kind of thing?
Oh, no. I met Anne when I was working at the Leader Post in Regina. She came to Saskatchewan. She used to fairly often to do concerts, and I met her at the Saskatchewan Centre of the Performing Arts. Funny little story there was that my wife was along with me, and I was a bit embarrassed that she came along on a free ticket. And we were backstage talking to Anne Murray, and I asked Anne Murray a couple of questions, and then she looked at me quizzically and said, "Well, who's this lady?" And I said, very foolishly, I said, "Oh, that's just my wife." And she said, "Oh, that's just your wife." And she proceeded to talk to my wife for about 25 minutes, half hour. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Oh, yeah, I forgot about you. Did you have any questions?" So we did my interview, but that was the first time I met her. And then when I wanted to write about Spring Hill, I figured who was a better person to write a foreword than Spring Hill's most famous native daughter and Canada's songbird. So I got a hold of Anne Murray, and she was keen to write something. And so we had a couple of nice conversations over the phone, and the result is in the book. So she remembers her early years in Spring Hill.
So let's go back. When and where, well, obviously in Spring Hill, but Blood on the Coal, about the great Spring Hill mine disaster. When was it and what really happened? Two different questions, but...
Well, it happened, it'll be 65 years ago this year, on October 27th, 1958. And the reason I was interested in the disaster, not only is it a compelling human interest story, but there's something more to it. And I tried to bring this theme out in the book. Let me just tell you a little, I'll sketch the scene for you a bit. Spring Hill at the time was a town about 6,000 people. And the principal employer, and really the only employer in the town, was the local coal mine. And the coal mine was, in the early 50s, coal started to become basically a fossil fuel that had no future, because everybody was switching, all the train operators in Canada were switching over to diesel, and a lot of the industries that were using coal in their factories were no longer using it. And so the Spring Hill mine was losing its market share. The American coal mines were undercutting it, and they were closer to the markets where the Spring Hill coal was being used. So they were cutting back, and Spring Hill was in dire straits. And what happened was the company that, this is something I didn't know until I got into researching the book, the company that owned the mine was one of these multinationals with various wings in different countries and different places. And they were here in Canada, the Avro Corporation, which you may know because they were building the Avro Aero.
Right, I wondered
airplane
about that. Yep.
At the time.
Yeah.
And it was a real cash, a black hole for the cash. And so the company sent out orders to its various directors and said, look, we need to make more money. Every division has to produce greater profits. And in Spring Hill, the only way to produce greater profits at a time when the market was soft was to increase production and hope that would make the difference here. It actually would keep the mine open. And you see, they couldn't close the mine because it was the only source of revenue for people in the town. If the mine closed, basically that was the end of the town. Anyway, the order came down from on high to increase production. So they made some changes in the way they were mining the coal. And at the time, the mine was already one of the deepest in the world, if not the deepest. It was also one of the most dangerous and unstable. And the miners were not happy to be told that they had to work harder and produce more coal, basically at diminishing returns. And Harold Brine, who was the last of the surviving miners and one of the chief sources for the book, told me, we told those college boys in their short pants that if they went ahead with the changes they were planning, it was going to kill every damn one of us. And he was basically right about that, because what happened was they had the disaster on October 27th, 1958, and 75 men died. So the disaster itself was is an interesting human interest story. But as I said, there's more to it, and I think that there's a cautionary tale there too, because it tells us basically what happens when we choose to ignore, for economic reasons, really, the imperatives that tell us, wait a minute, you should stop and think about what you're doing. I leave it to you and to the people listening to draw their own conclusions about what I'm getting at here.
And it's very interesting because I like the way that the book builds, I'll say, suspense, because we start off with just sort of sketching the town and describing who the main characters are, and slowly what they're doing on certain days, and then slowly building up to the actual event itself. I'm assuming that's kind of what you had in mind when you plotted this out?
Yeah, I did. And, generally when people write about disasters, and there were two other books written about the disaster. One right at the time, in early '59, written by a reporter from the Boston Globe newspaper. As you probably know, there are close ties between the Canadian maritime provinces, particularly Nova Scotia, and New England and the Boston area. So Boston was very interested in what was going on at Spring Hill, and they sent this reporter up to cover the events there. And he wrote a book about the disaster, and kind of a fanciful account, if you will. I think he made some of it up. I'm not sure where he got his information from. And then there was another writer, an American again, Melissa Fay Green, who comes from Georgia, and I think she originally had some family ties to the area around Spring Hill. But she wrote a book as well. It's, I would say, it's the definitive account of what actually happened in the mine. Although Harold Brine, again, one of my chief sources and the last survivor of the miners, told me that he thought she'd made up some details as well. So there were those two books written, and both of them, when I read them, left me a little bit flat, in the sense that I didn't really have a feel for what exactly had happened or for the people, because when writers write about disasters, too often they get hung up on the big story about how many people died and woe is me suffering and all that sort of thing. But what I wanted to do, my journalistic training kicked in here. Yep. I wanted to focus on a limited number of people to tell their stories, the human stories of what happened in the mine. And so for that reason I chose three miners, and I chose one of the town doctors who was instrumental in the rescue that took place. Harold Brine was one of my subjects, and as I say, he was the last of the miners who was still alive. And I went to visit him and talked to him countless times, and he became a friend. I'm sorry to say that his health was in decline when I met him, and just a few weeks ago, he called me and told me that his suffering was such. He had bad lungs and he had a bad heart. He said, the suffering, I just can't take it anymore. So he opted for a medically assisted death. So I was very, very sad to hear that. But I was able to talk to him at great length, and he answered all my questions, explained everything that he could that happened in the mine. So he was one of my chief sources. I had two other miners that I wrote about. One was a gentleman by the name of Morris Ruddick. And Morris Ruddick was a black miner. There were a handful in Spring Hill, and there's a small black community there. So I wrote about him, and he had a very interesting experience, primarily because he was a musician, and probably, if he was alive today, he would probably be a musical star, because he was extremely talented, and he had a very large family, and he taught all of his children. He had 13 kids, he and his wife.
Yeah, and, I saw that about one after the other.
Yes, I don't think they didn't have TV or anything in those days too much.
Nothing else to do.
Nothing to do with the evenings. But anyway, Morris taught all his kids to sing and dance and all the rest of it. And he entertained the miners after the cave-in, when he was trapped underground. He entertained the other miners with his hymn singing and whatnot. And then there was a third miner by the name of Tommy Tabor, who I had difficulty writing about him because he was killed in the mine disaster. So it was difficult to maintain a sense of drama, not to mention too early on what had happened to him. But tragically, he died. Was killed instantaneously in the disaster. And the other person I wrote about was one of the town doctors, a very interesting man named Eric Bird was his last name, and he worked his way through medical school by working in the mine as a miner. So he had a real feel for what it was like to work in the mine. So anyway, I tried to focus on those individuals to tell their stories, and I hope I did. I also tried to find some women to give a female perspective, but I was saddened to find that just about everybody who was around from those days, female, the wives and were all gone. The ones that were still alive, mentally were not able to share their memories with me, so it made it difficult.
Like you said, we all know that there was a cave-in, not a cave-in, you'll explain that in a moment, but blood on the coal, the suspense leading up to it's like the movie Titanic. We all know that it sank, but when you watch the movie, you get the stories behind the people involved and the main characters. Of course, it's all made up, it's fiction, but in your book, it's true stories about true people, and there's nothing better than a true story about a real person. So that's why I recommend Blood on the Coal, the true story of the great Spring Hill mining disaster or mine disaster, to each and everyone out there. So lots of people are involved in. Well, Tommy, you were talking about, he was a Second World War veteran, so he survived that, and then he had to go and back to the mines, and that's what happened to him. So
yeah, he was quite a ball player, quite a baseball player, and I think in another time, given different circumstances, he might have gone on to play professional baseball, or at least tried to, and that's what he loved to do. But as I said, in a town like Spring Hill, there was no alternative. If you wanted to work, you either went to the mine or you left town. And I guess to a certain extent, not much has changed for people who live in places out of the way in Nova Scotia and other areas down that way. The job opportunities for young people are few and far between. That was one of the reasons that the mine again stayed open, because there was nothing else there. And people, the one difference between what happened in Spring Hill and what happened in a disaster like the Titanic or any of the other things that happened is that people knew. They knew in Spring Hill that something bad was going to happen sooner or later, but they had no alternative and no option but to work. And if the men didn't work, they didn't get paid, and they couldn't feed their families. And so the expression I use, is the old one, that they whistled past the graveyard. And sooner or later, something bad would happen, and it was going to happen, and it did. It's a very sad story, but it's I guess it's the way things work in a lot of communities these days. And since time immemorial, it's been that way.
Yep.
You either work or you don't eat.
Right. Can you tell us what there was 2 shifts running, was there, at the mine at that time?
Yeah. There were 2 shifts, a day shift and an evening shift, and there was also actually a shift overnight, because what happened was after the miners went home in the evening, there was another shift that came in. These were all the sort of the junior workers, the guys who wanted to be hired to actually work in the mine. They came in and did all the maintenance work. They moved the equipment around underground, and they cleaned up and basically did the Joe jobs. They used a lot of lumber underground, pieces of timber which they used to shore up the tunnels, and that's what these fellows did. These were the woodmen. And Harold Bryan, for example, one of the guys I wrote about, started out as a woodman. He was there working the night shift and moving lumber around and whatnot. Made about 2/3 of what a miner did. They were supposed to write tests after a certain number of years. If they passed the test, they got their ticket, as they called it, to be a miner. But Harold Bryan was a pretty social guy and knew everybody, and everybody liked him. So, he told me, I didn't write any damn tests. They just gave me my ticket. And I asked him how much he made, and he said, well, I don't know. He took his money home each day or each Friday when he got paid, and gave it to his wife, and she just kept it, put it under the mattress. He never had a bank account in his life, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. But that was the way things were done in those days.
Do you know how much they actually did get paid?
I think it was about $15 a shift, $15 to $16. So you can do the math, and you'll figure out that they weren't making a lot of money. But back at the time in the late 50s, that was the reasonable wage, particularly in a place like Nova Scotia. It was a fair industrial wage, and that's why people were happy to work. They felt they were damn lucky to have a job at the mine. Dirty as it was, and they said the job was dirty, but the money wasn't.
Right, that's right. It's clean money. Dirty job, clean money. That's an expression that goes around here about oil fields and stuff. That's
absolutely, yeah.
Well, that was a good wage, because my first full-time job in radio was in 1969. It was $300 a month. So somebody making more than that in 1958, that's pretty good, or 56 or 55, so relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And
I think I would have rather had your job, though.
Right.
When I was doing my research, I was down in Spring Hill, and the mine, of course, is closed over. There's nothing left of the mine. They bulldozed the entire site, so it's just a field now with a bunch of some rubble and some weeds growing, a few scrubby trees. But there is what they called a syndicate mine, because after the mine closed, a lot of the miners, the older ones, were in town. They didn't want to leave. They had family there and all the rest of it, and they just couldn't afford to leave, and Spring Hill was their home. So they started what they called a syndicate mine, a bootleg mine, which is, there's still a chunk of it there in Spring Hill. You can go down in it. What happened there was it wasn't very safe, and some men died. Some were electrocuted, and there were a couple of cave-ins and whatnot. So that was the end of that mine, but it's still there. You can go down in it, and I did. I went down about 100 yards into it with one of the guides who's there and shows people around. And as I've told a number of people, you can close your eyes and it's dark, but when you go down in a mine, when you open your eyes, there is no light. There's absolutely no light. And the fellow who took me into the mine said, "We want to see how dark it is," and he turned off his light, and it was the darkness was so intense, so thick, that as I told people, you could reach out and touch it. It was just seemed to envelop you. And for the life of me, can't imagine.
No.
I can't imagine making my living working there day after day after day down in there, and the air is filled with coal dust, and it's hot, and the work is hard, and you never know if you hear a rumble, if that's going to be the end of you.
And they called it a bump.
Those men really earned their livings, let's put it that way.
They called it a bump or something when they heard something like that.
Yeah, they called it a bump. It was basically a mini earthquake, and it was because the way the mine was, the way the coal was being mined, left areas where the earth could shift, and you never knew when it was going to shift or if it was going to. And the way the miners put it, it's sort of like, I guess, soldiers in combat. They say, well, if you hear a shell whining, you're going to be okay because it's not going to hit you. If you don't hear it, it's because you're dead. And it was basically the same in the mine. If you heard the rumble, you paused and you knew, well, I've dodged that bullet.
Yep.
If you didn't hear the rumble, you were probably going to be dead if something happened. And that's what happened on on the anniversary, or on the day that the mine actually bumped.
And then that was in October of 1956? 58. So
there were three. Actually, there were three major catastrophes at Spring Hill. One in 1898, another in 1956, and then the coup de grace was the 58 disaster, because that killed the mine. After that, the market was, as I said, the market was dead. The company that ran the mine decided that it wasn't worth reopening it because they weren't going to make any money out of it anyway, and it cost too much to get things going again. So that was the end of the mine. That was the end of Spring Hill. If you go to Spring Hill today, it's not even a town anymore. The main street is there isn't a lot there in terms of the business, and the fine dining. People in Spring Hill may dislike me for saying this, but fine dining in Spring Hill is Tim Hortons, because there isn't a heck of a lot there. People have to go nearby to Amherst. There's not even a hotel in Spring Hill. When you go there, there's no place to stay. The people there are wonderful people, friendly, like your family. They're so friendly to you. But there just isn't anything in Spring Hill.
And I was going to ask you what Spring Hill's like today. Well, there's the Anne Murray Museum, though, isn't there?
There is, and it's actually quite a nice facility, and I was pleasantly surprised when I went through it. I had an hour or two to kill one afternoon, and I went over there and went through it, and we tend to take our own for granted, and Anne Murray was, when you go through her museum, and you see the record of who she performed with, who she knew, who she associated with. It's basically a who's who of musical stars of the late 20th century, early 21st century. There is almost anyone you could think of that, in music, popular music, she performed with, and was well respected by them. I was amazed. I had no idea, and she's put together a really wonderful collection of memorabilia, her records and everything. It's a place that if you ever get to Spring Hill, it's well worth visiting. It's open during the summer months of the year, but I think a lot of people come from around the world, people who are Anne Murray fans. And I should tell you this, is that Anne Murray wrote the foreword to my book, and my daughters, the eldest of whom is 32, said to me, "Dad, who's Anne Murray?"
Well, what? Give me a break.
So they sure made me feel old.
Well, you could ask her, who is Drake, or somebody like that, I guess.
Drake, that's a duck, isn't it?
Well, pretty much. I don't know. He's pretty...
The noise he makes sounds like a duck to me, but what do I know?
Yeah, he's pretty big. The blood on the coal about the Spring Hill mine, is that now the 1956 one, that was kind of famous because there was CBC broadcasts that went on for hours about the rescue efforts. But was 1958 event covered in the same way? Yeah,
actually, it was a 58 disaster that was where CBC pioneered it. CBC Radio had done a report about another mine disaster that happened in Nova Scotia, a gold mining disaster in 1936. But in 58, they actually had television cameras there, so it was live broadcast. But if you go online to the CBC archives, just go online and punch it up, CBC archives, and Spring Hill mine disaster. You type that in, and up come the, I guess they're called kinescopes or something that they recorded in those days.
Yep.
And then you see how primitive television was at the time. I mean, it was like the transmission was coming from outer space or someplace. It was, of course, black and white, and it had lots of static on it and whatnot. And somebody would have a little earphone in their ear, and they'd be saying, "Come in, Spring Hill, come in." And somebody in Spring Hill say, "That's in Spring Hill now," and it's and then they'd start telling you about what was happening. So it's really fascinating to watch these reports. They were as primitive as they were. They were a wonder at the time, and CBC sort of pioneered this. And their broadcasts were picked up. I guess they were taped or cinescoped or whatever they called it, and given to the Americans, and the Americans broadcast them on across the United States, and also they were on the BBC. So people in the UK and even in Europe saw the reports. So it was at the time it was considered quite revolutionary.
And how deep exactly was the area that the disaster happened? It was, I can't believe how you told us in the book, but I want you to tell everybody now how deep it actually was.
was like 4,000 feet down. So it doesn't sound like much until you start thinking about 4,000 feet. It's quite a ways. But they talked about the levels being 13,000, 13,4, 13,8, and there was another level down at 14 something that was never fully developed. But the reason that they talked about it in that way was because when you were at the top, at the head of the mine, and you went down the tracks, which were on a slope of 30 degrees or whatever, in a little cart, you got down to 7,500 feet. You traveled actually 7,500 feet along these rails. And then there was a flat area where you got off and you went, walked along a little tunnel and got in another little cart that took you down on another slope, and that would take you down to 12,000, 12,8, 12,4, 12,8, 13,2, 13,4. So you were actually that distance from the mine head if you walked up the slope. Not that you'd want to walk up, but that's how far you were. But in terms of the vertical depth, it was about 4,000 feet.
And when they were doing that at that level down where the disaster happened, the shafts kind of got evened out, and then that's what caused perhaps the fault, the big bump.
Yep. Well, as I said, what happened was it was like a mini earthquake, or if you want to say explosion that happened underground. And what happened was it was below the mine. The ground shifted, and so everything moved. It bumped up.
Right.
The earth like bucked up like a bucking horse. It bucked up, and so the fellows who were down at the lowest level, down at 13.8, they didn't stand a chance. Basically, there were only a few of them who survived because the mine bucked up, and people, if you were standing there, if you're standing in a room and somebody suddenly threw you against the ceiling and the floor came up after you and pressed you in between there, you were just squashed. And that's what happened to just about everybody who died in the mine disaster. They were thrown up against the ceiling, and then the floor rushed up to crush them. The ones who survived happened to be in areas where they were right at the corners of where they were digging. So one tunnel intersected another tunnel, and the floor didn't come up quite in the same way against the roof. So those were the people who survived. That was the man I mentioned, Harold Bryan and Ruddick. Both were in that situation where they survived, although they were in separate areas, and they got rescued at different times. But that's how they were able to survive.
Well, it wasn't actually a cave-in; it's a cave-up.
A cave up, if that's how you want to phrase it. Yeah, the floor jumped up and bit them, so to speak.
Oh,
and
that's terrible.
Bit them in a very bad way. Yeah.
Did they actually get paid for travel time when they had to go from the surface down to their various levels?
No, they got paid. They got paid by the hour, but it was only when they started work. Oh. And the cruel things about this whole story is that Harold Bryan told me that once the cave-in happened. And it happened in the evening. The instant it happened, they stopped getting paid because they weren't working.
Oh, jeez. Of course they can't work because there's no mine left.
No mine left. So 8/28 or whatever, when the bump happened, that was it. They got no further pay, which is really stunning when you think of it. I mean, God, these men were there working away, and down 4,000 feet, and the mine bumps. And they're in the dark, and suddenly, because they're no longer producing coal, they're not getting paid. They got paid a flat wage, and if they could exceed a little quota that they were given, or a minimum, that if they got more coal than that produced during the course of a day, they got an extra little bit on their paychecks. So the incentive was to do as much as you could in the hours that you were down there, the 8 hours you were down there. And if you didn't produce anything, well, you didn't get paid.
And it's
similar if you got hurt.
Yeah.
If you were injured and you didn't go to work for any reason, you didn't get paid.
You didn't get paid. And things have changed. Sometimes not much for the better, but at least a little bit for the better. But
no kidding.
I can understand though, but back then, $10 extra a week would go a long way.
Oh, absolutely, it would. Yeah. We talk about inflation nowadays. Prices were considerably lower in those days, and a dollar went a lot farther, and so a dollar meant to those people.
And like you said about Spring Hill, just diverge. What am I saying here? Talking about Boston, a lot of people, they like the Boston Red Sox in that area.
Yeah, they did. As you know, they still do, I think. They like the Boston Bruins as well. And
yep.
Of course, there were Montreal Canadian fans.
Of course.
I thought that was quite interesting when I talked to the people in Spring Hill that, we have this living here in Ontario, all we hear about is those darn Maple Leafs.
Yep.
I don't like. I keep hoping. I grin every time they lose. I don't like them.
Yeah, me too.
Oh
yeah,
something in common.
I'm a Montreal fan from the word go. So yep.
Down in Nova Scotia, they like either Boston Bruins primarily or Montreal. So,
good.
It was interesting to hear that. And the Red Sox, of course, are the baseball team down in that area.
Right.
The Blue Jays have some following, but it's mainly Red Sox.
Okay. What do you hope Blood on the Coal will accomplish?
Well, as I said, it's a human interest story, but the reason I wrote it was because, as I said, I think it's a cautionary tale. To me, it is, and it's about the dangers of ignoring signs. And as I said, whistling past the graveyard. Sometimes we get blasé about things we're doing, and we tend to downplay. If you want to use the term experts, the experts tell us something, and we tend not to believe them these days because we're very cynical about life and about a lot of things that are happening, and who can you really believe? In this case, there were warnings issued. People knew, but they had no choice but to do what they were doing, and they had very compelling reasons to do so. If they wanted to eat, they had to work. No work, no eat. And in this case, they knew that they were courting danger each and every day they went to work. Think about it, it's an awful thing to think that anybody would get up in the morning, pack their lunch, and go off to work, and you'd see them off out the door, and you'd think, will I ever see that person again? We have that with police and firemen and
right.
a number of other professions, but in the case of a coal mine, the accidents happened much more often, and they were potentially much more serious because not just one or two people would be killed, there'd be scores killed, and that's in fact what happened in Spring Hill. As I said, it's a cautionary tale. They had they were producing a product that the market was dying for. They knew that just mining, the very fact that they were mining coal and breathing in coal dust was hazardous to their health. Yet they did it because, again, they needed the job, they needed the money, and the life of the community, the whole life of the community depended on it. So, there are certain parallels to be drawn in the world today. And as I said, I don't want to preach about that. I just thought that was something that was significant, and it made this whole story of what happened in Spring Hill something that resonates today. It certainly resonated for me. And I gained a great deal of respect for the people who did this for a living, because as I said, I could not, for the life of me, think of doing it for a living. There was an Englishman who worked. He was a miner in England. Came over as a teenager to Spring Hill, and he worked in the mines for 60 some odd years. I think it was 63 years. And I think, my God, 63 years working underground. It's amazing that he survived, but he did somehow.
Somehow, yes.
Somehow.
Ken Cuthbertson, a couple more questions. First of all, why exactly do you write, and why nonfiction?
Why nonfiction? Well, there was an article in the Globe and Mail. I don't know if you see the Globe and Mail, but you can go online and find the article by a very fine Canadian historian by the name of Charlotte Gray. Charlotte Gray writes popular histories, and she wrote a piece in the Globe and Mail a couple of weekends back on a Saturday about nonfiction, Canadian nonfiction, and how publishers don't seem to be interested in it anymore. And the fact is that when we're not interested in publishing Canadian history and people don't read it, they forget about who we are, where we came from, and why we are as we are. And I think Canadian history, there's a lot of untold stories, or stories that could be told better, because once you begin to understand a little bit about how this country came to be what it is and who we are, I think you better understand yourself, and you better understand where we are and where we're going. So I always like a good story. I mean, history to me is an unending story, and it's endlessly fascinating. My own kids, daughters, will sit and watch television, American fiction. They'll see something on Netflix or whatever, and they talk about what a great story it is. And I always point out to them, that those stories are based on, in most cases, real life. In a lot of cases, real life or real characters. And Canadian history is full of those kind of people. And the stories are endlessly fascinating. They're every bit as exciting and entertaining as anything you'll see on television or in the movies. but they just aren't told. So that's why I do it, because I love reading and writing about Canadian history. It makes me think, and it gives me a better perspective on the world today, and that's, I think, vitally important.
Is there any secrets to writing nonfiction?
Well, you got to be prepared to put your fanny on a chair and do it. But yeah, you have to do the research, because if you don't do the research, invariably somebody's going to catch out. You're going to hear from people who say, "You got that wrong, you dummy. What's wrong with you?" And plus, the other thing is that when you're doing the research, quite often you'll look at a source and you'll say, "That seems interesting." You start doing a little digging and you discover the source got it wrong. So, if you make a mistake, it becomes perpetuated. And in future, somebody else looks at what you've written and they make the same mistake. So then, I guess, perception becomes reality, and the history is recorded inaccurately and people don't understand it. And that's again, something that's important these days, because, what is history? It used to be if you looked at letters and written documents, you knew what the story was. Nowadays, you look at a document that's digital, that's online, you don't know if somebody has doctored it. You don't know if it's true or it's not true. So that's, I guess, one of the things with nonfiction is trying to sift through what's truth and what's not truth. So it's like being a detective, and It's kind of fun. You get paid for it as well. Not very well, but you get paid for it.
Get paid.
You make about $1 an hour, I think.
If
you're lucky.
Blood on the Coal, the latest work from Ken Cuthbertson. What's next for you, Ken?
Perhaps another disaster book. I'm contemplating that. They seem to have me my publisher seems to have me pigeonholed as a writer of disaster stories. So I won't say any more than that, other than the fact that it's a maritime disaster story that I'm developing. I'm going to send the proposal into my publisher. But I mentioned the Charlotte Gray piece that was in the Globe and Mail a couple of weeks ago, and I recommend it to people. But she laments the fact that Canadian publishers, which most of them are now run by American or multinational corporations, they just don't seem to be interested in Canada all that much. And if you look in the bookstores, or you go online, you'll find most of the books that are for sale are written by Americans.
Oh, yeah.
And they just simply bring them into Canada and sell them here. So, we tend to think, the Americans do everything so much better than we do, but they don't.
They do.
It's as simple as that. And, so as I said, Charlotte Gray is lamenting the fact that Canadian publishers don't seem all that interested in producing books by Canadians about nonfiction topics. And, I share those concerns.
Well,
share those concerns.
Shame on
There's
that.
a very well-known Canadian writer. I won't give you his name, but he's written about 24 books, and just about every one of them has been a bestseller. And he phoned me one day, quite dismayed, because he was saying he proposed his next book to his publisher, and the publisher, his new editor there, there's a constant turnover in the publishing world, particularly with editors. The new editor who he was supposed to work with said to him, "Oh, well, let's wait and see how this current book does before we entertain any new proposals from you." So he was deeply, deeply offended, and has jumped publishers. And I can understand why, but his situation is typical. So, anyone who's thinking of writing or wants to write Canadian nonfiction should be aware that it's a tough market, and not only do you have to do a lot of work to write the book, you have to really be diligent in terms of pressuring your publisher and going after finding a publisher first, going up, but pressuring them to promote the work properly, because they don't seem to be all that keen to do it. It's kind of a depressing thing to say, but it's true. So I guess the best thing is write a fiction. Sit down and write a novel that's going to sell 1 million copies, like Harry Potter or something, and then you get paid for it as well.
Right. Okay. Well, Ken, it's been a pleasure. Ken Cuthbertson, thanks for being with us today.
Well, it's always my pleasure, Dennis, and thanks again, and keep up the good work. You're doing a valuable work in talking to authors and promoting them, and also spreading the good word about what they're doing. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking the time to call me.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at Amazon.ca.